What's happening YouTube? PokePhD here, and today we're going to be discussing booster boxes and elite trainer box prices and how they compare and how they do over some period of time. Before we get into the video, if you do enjoy it, please leave a like, and if you're not subscribed already, please do so. So to give a bit more of an idea what I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes, I want to kind of look at how booster box and elite trainer box prices evolve a little bit over time and how they compare. And if you are interested in investing into your product, and if you had the choice between the two, what you should choose potentially, and kind of base that around some data that I have put together rather than just making assumptions on different products. So first things first, I want to look at just some booster box and elite trainer box prices for some sets. So the reason why I've included these sets is because they are just, I think, just interesting examples to look at. The sets themselves, of course, they're ETBs, so they're going to be limited from X and Y onwards. But in this video, I'm solely going to look at Sword and Shield, and Sun and Moon, just because we've got broader spectrum of more availability of prices, and we've got a spectra of different products and different market runs, different production quantities, and a lot of variables to them. But I think not including XY is probably beneficial in terms of just having this kind of concise analysis. So first things first, yeah, I've included Brilliant Stars, Evolving Skies, Darkness Ablaze from Sword and Shield, of course, and then Cosmic Eclipse Team Up, Sun and Moon base from Sun and Moon. And as you can see, booster price on the left, ETB price on the right. Generally, I've included these boxes just because they either stand out, like obviously Evolving Skies and Team Up as booster boxes within their relative eras. And then, for example, you look at something like Cosmic Eclipse, where you've got a crazy ETB price and booster box price similar to Team Up, of course. And then, but also that's not guaranteed, of course. That's why I included something like Sun and Moon, which the booster price has increased significantly, but the ETB price is pretty much what it would have been, or around about what it was on release. And obviously there are various factors to that, including the really high print run of Sun and Moon, and the insane amount of ETBs that did produce. 2 years into the Sword and Shield era, you were still seeing Sun and Moon based products in like collection boxes and other kind of products. And to think that it was the first set of Sun and Moon that came out all the way back in beginning of 2017, and you were still finding it at the end of 2021, I don't know if it continued into 2022, but the fact that you could see it at that period of time was insane to think. So just as I said, just a few examples that I thought were interesting and worth discussing. Team Up is the standout in terms of like that kind of booster box price, and likely didn't have the longest product run. I believe there was an expected reprint, but that never happened. And then also the fact that it is probably the set in Sun and Moon with the best pulls. You've got those alt arts that I've talked about previously in other videos. Because you can see obviously the ETB price is similar to that of Cosmic Eclipse, where the booster box is over $400 more expensive. So yeah, there are a lot of variables and variations in here. This is why it's not like a concrete analysis, and that is usually the case with Pokemon. I mean, I work as a data scientist, and a lot of my analysis there, however I come across the conclusions, whether it be machine learning or just like analytics, they are a lot more concise than something like Pokemon. But you know, I put together something that I thought is interesting and talking about. So let's just get into the few variables that I kind of put together. As you can see, the metric that I thought was interesting is listed on the left. So you can see the chosen values for a certain reason, or defined these parameters, these metrics for a certain reason. So you've got average percentage of MSRP. So if something is at 100%, that means it's the same price as MSRP. Average gain per year versus MSRP. So that's the same thing. It's the price of the product relative to MSRP, and then divided basically by the time frame that product is being released, just to get an idea of kind of some temporal influence on the price. And then I've done the same thing but for the special sets. So those are the sets that didn't come with booster boxes, the kind of holiday set, the hidden fates, the shining fates, that kind of product. So as you can see, you know, across the board, generally, on average, the price of products throughout each era, Sword and Shield and Sun and Moon, both for booster boxes and for ETBs, the average price, so again, this is taken across the entire spectrum of all the different booster boxes, of all the different ETBs. The average prices are above, even with Sword and Shield, and this is considering the fact that, you know, we're still waiting for the end of the era. Like, I've not included Crown Zenith in any of the data here. But it's interesting that with Sword and Shield, you've got sets that have come out recently, things like Lost Origins and Silver Tempest, and they've actually stayed relatively stable above MSRP, or well, that's actually sorry, all the prices are quoted in dollars, actually. So I think they're roughly about 130, which is close considering the sets just come out. And generally, the MSRP is taken as $140, but maybe it would have been fairer to take it at about $100, because generally that's what booster boxes tend to go for. So I defined the MSRP for the booster boxes as 140 and the ETB 40. Again, you can make the argument that it should be lower for booster boxes, for the reason I stated there. However, I just took those MSRP prices from the. So yeah, the average price, so the average percentage of MSRP across the board basically is higher than what we see. So this is obviously averaged over Sword and Shield. So this takes into account Evolving Skies, which is significantly over, and something like Brilliant Stars, which is also somewhat over, but then also accounts for products like Battle Styles, which is going for around about $100, so $40 under. A lot of the ETBs in Sword and Shield, with Sword and Shield, it seems to be that either at this point in time you have ETBs that are under MSRP like 35 just because they were overprinted, for example, like Fusion Strike or Battle Styles, or they're just not good sets similar to that. And then you've got I think what stood out the most amongst the Sword and Shield ETBs are the special sets, and that's where you can see the inflation from across the board. You know, ETBs including the main sets, including the standard sets, as well as the special sets. So we see the same thing, of course, with Sun and Moon, but still something I wanted to emphasize, just because you know, if you look through the ETB prices, the reason why it's above MSRP, at least the kind of average percentage, is basically down to Evolving Skies, and that price, you know, up until relatively recently, you know, it was going for around $45. So that's happened reasonably recently. And then we're talking about the special sets, we're talking about Champions Path, we're talking about Celebrations, we're talking about even Shining Faces starting to creep up as well. And then if we then take a look at Sun and Moon, so the difference is significantly higher, of course, but that's expected considering the sets are a little bit older. Potentially this is where it would have been interesting to look at X and Y, but I just didn't see the availability of like good data there, so that's why that didn't happen. There's another reason why that wasn't included. But you can see generally the average price of a Sun and Moon booster box relative to MSRP is around, you know, if it's at the value there, 301%, that's basically triple the value of MSRP, and then the ETBs are over 5 times the value of P. So for both Sword and Shield and Sun and Moon, the ETB values are higher relative to MSRP compared to the booster boxes. This is exaggerated massively, of course, for Sun and Moon, and that's, as far as I'm aware, down mostly to the kind of rarity, and I say rarity in like inverted commas just because they're not necessarily that rare, but just the availability of ETBs from that era, just because generally print runs were much higher in Sword and Shield due to obviously all the boom in 2020, and a lot of that focus was of course on ETBs as well. So I generally, from what I see, and I'm always looking around at sealed product prices, I do find a lot of the time with certain Sun and Moon products, the booster boxes are significantly easier to find than ETBs. And now that ETBs have become more of a collection piece, and I believe that, I mean, I've seen that's become the case over the last couple of years, but like partway into the Sword and Shield era. Because personally, I'm not the biggest fan of ETBs. I just think they're big and they just don't get as, you know, the kind of price per pack is worse. And sometimes, obviously, with special sets, you get a good promo card, but those promo cards tend to be worthless just because the ETBs are printed quite heavily, particularly in Shield. But you can see that if you were just to pick out any booster box, or the average booster box, the average ETB generally does higher. Can't just say that's going to be the case, of course, for everything, just because as I showed earlier, Sun and Moon booster box increased significantly higher than the ETB, but there were obviously reasons for that. And as long as you kind of understand those kind of reasons, the impact that something like print runs have, the impact, availability of product, when, how old a set is, that kind of thing, how often it was, or how many reprints and scarcity, that kind of thing, you take that into account, it can really help with your conclusions and judgments when looking at that. If we look at those gains but over or like normalized to the year, then we start to see that again, of course, the time frame being the same, ETBs are of course going to be higher than booster boxes, but I guess the relative difference. So again, Sword and Shield hasn't, once the sets are no longer in print and we moved out, we're in Scarlet and Violet, like a significant amount in where the production of, or the printing of Sword and Shield products has reduced significantly, because of course for the first 6 months, maybe a year, it's still going to be reasonably high. Depends of course how Pokemon do it, but that's, I would say, a reasonable expectation. But the difference between the two isn't so significantly high. 10% gain per year versus 20% gain per year, and of course this is on average, it's been about 3 years, so a year and a half. With the booster boxes and the ETBs for Sun and Moon, we do see something similar. In fact, it's from 57% gain per year versus 123% for the ETB. So this is from 2017 to the end of 2019. So looking about 3.5 to 4 years ago. So what we've seen from the ETBs generally across the board is that kind of 400% gain, 430% gain over almost 4 years. So as it says there, roughly like increasing in value equal to its original value, at least like once per year, which doesn't sound like a bad thing at all. It sounds like a really valuable number. The thing is, obviously, then it looks to be the case that ETBs are clearly the ones to go for, but I think a few things to take into account, of course, alongside the things I've already mentioned, just the fact that some of the Sun and Moon ETBs, again, that scarcity due to the fact that obviously just not as many print runs, not as much product being printed as we've seen with Sword and Shield. I just don't think that's going to translate from what we've seen with Sun and Moon. I don't see it translating as well as what we've seen with Sword and Shield. Again, like the ETBs that we have at the moment, they're either good and doing well considering the time they've been out, or they're basically bottoming out and they've stayed there, they've been there for a while, things like Battle Styles. But I think if you're smart and you realize, obviously, Battle Styles is not the one to go for. I think for me personally, Celebrations is the ETB that I would go for, if anything, out of Shield, and that's why I wanted to kind of talk or include those values for the special sets as well, because you see with sets like Shining Legends, Dragon Majesty, that they completely exploded in price in 2020. Again, another thing to take into account that I probably could spend another 2 hours talking about is obviously the boom that came from 2020, and everything that came before it certainly exploded in price. And if we looked at this in the middle of 2020, and of course there were fewer booster boxes and ETBs from Sword and Shield, but those booster box and ETB numbers would obviously be significantly higher than what they are now, on average, of course. When like Vivid Voltage booster box was going for $200, over $200, same for Darkness Ablaze, that kind. So generally, I don't see it translating as much, or if I do, the way I see it, I guess, is that it's the special sets really of the Sword and Shield ETBs I kind of see doing significantly better. Again, I don't, these are all just kind of my thoughts. You can't really guarantee anything of the sort, but from what I've seen and how these certain prices have been bottoming out and have been at that bottom price for a while, a lot of these ETBs, even the new sets that come out, The new sets come out and the ETB prices are at the floor immediately, and you know I've seen pre-orders for last couple of sets, Lost Orders, Lost Origin Silver Tempest. I've seen ETB pre-release pre-order prices at $30 as well, which is kind of crazy to think. But you know, when you pick up something like that, that kind of really low distributor price, that kind of thing, you really can't go wrong long term. But I think if you had to be selective, I would target those special sets. Personally would go for, as I said, celebrations, not so much Champions Path. That's ridiculously inflated at the moment, although is that going to get reprinted? It's probably unlikely at this point. Same with Shining Fate. I think potentially Shining Fates might be a good one to go for, just because again, obviously it was an interesting set, a special set. And the price is still low there, at least relative to Champions Path, which $100 per ETB. And then yeah, generally, obviously across the board with Sun and Moon, the ETBs just did really well. Once people got more interested in collecting ETBs, because it's much more a thing now than it was 3 years ago. People obviously looked back. First, they would have seen all of these Sun and Moon sets, and the fact that at that time they weren't ridiculously expensive. But then, considering that they just weren't as available as the Sword and Shield sets, then those prices quickly inflated, and that's why I recall, just before the boom in 2020, Shining Legends ETBs were, I don't recall the exact price, but they were, I think, a little bit under $100, and then by the end of 2020, you were looking at a pretty big swing, and something we saw with a lot of the Sword and Shield sets. But because they weren't reprinted at some point during the next 2 years, those prices were pretty steady, and then since have just been slowly climbing. And I guess that's what we're going to see with the Sword and Shield, sets as time goes on. But because they have been reprinted and they're at bottom prices now, how long is it going to take for us to potentially get through that, and then for them to start rising up? Interesting to see, interesting thing. And I hope you enjoyed and benefited from the discussion that I've just presented. Again, there's so many different ways of looking at it. One thing I would like to do is like an analysis of the special sets versus the regular sets. Over time, I think that would be interesting. Pokemon Center ETBs versus regular ETBs, that kind of thing. Again, something I think worth looking at. But as I mentioned, I hope you found this interesting. And also, if you did enjoy this, please don't forget to leave a like, and thank you for checking out the video. I'll catch you on the next one.